Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Kirkpatrick Podcast. It is Vanessa, the owner and CEO of Kirkpatrick Partners. And today I'm going to be talking about why I'm a little afraid of this big conversation we're having in AI. Now, in case you hadn't heard, although I think at this point a lot of us have, there is this big lawsuit with Workday that essentially they're being sued for improper hiring practices and biased hiring practices, where they were deploying AI and it was essentially weeding out folks that were applicants that were neurodivergent, maybe some that had autism, just some sort of disability. And Workday is in some trouble with that, and the fact of the matter is, I do not think that Workday will be the only one in this. It just happens to be the first, one of the first and one of the biggest names out there, especially when it comes to, hiring, because everyone, it feels like, uses Workday. And then, there's always that joke of like, how many different logins do we need for Workday when we're applying for jobs? I digress. But last night, I was chatting with some folks, some L&D leaders, and we started talking about, look, this is like an L&D business owner meetup, and how do we share and report and put into our contracts and things like that. Like, how do we protect ourselves with the fact that we may use AI for some of the work that we do? And that's where, we really kind of dove into some of the ethics and the implications of this Workday case. And I think it's at first easy to say, like, they're really talking about like hiring. But when we think about the downstream effects of this and how many applications are leveraging AI, it is going to affect us all in some way, shape, or form. Like, I think about performance management, right? If we are somehow leveraging AI to help us with performance management, is there a case to be made that maybe AI is being biased against certain employees? And then we think about evaluation. When we think about what gets pulled out of, qualitative analysis and things like that, and reports and recommendations, is there also potential bias that can come out of that? And if you make decisions straight from whatever the robot says, what is that implication for you? And so that's where I want to spend a little bit of time and have us really like sitting back and thinking. It is so easy, and I'm going to tell you right now, so tempting to just take a lot of what AI puts out there and just reuse it, and call it your own and call it done. I can tell you, I look at what comes out, I'm like, that's pretty good, especially when your tools are really trained on you and the way that you speak or your processes or the way that your syntax and all of that. Look at me using a big word, syntax. Obviously, we tell them editing the book. But anyway, when we think about truly how easy it is more easy than it is not to just use what AI puts out there. And here's the thing. You and I may know that there still needs to be human oversight, but there are so many people that are using the tools, even in our own organizations. And they're overwhelmed with work. They're overwhelmed with to-dos that, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to use that. And so there is a lot of potential harm and a lot of lessons that we need to be learning from this Workday lawsuit. The fact is, this lawsuit is not just about the use of AI. It's about accountability. At the end of the day, the AI is the AI. It's a tool. It's a software, whatever. But the human still has to own the accountability at the end of the day. It's like, you know, if your dog bites another person, who's ultimately responsible? The owner. Like, yeah, the dog did the thing, but the owner has to own the accountability for it. And that's the same thing. I think that there's two parallels to talk about here. One, there is accountability from the perspective of like Workday, right? As the ones that created the platform and put in the AI. But then there's also the companies that use Workday, and how are they held accountable for not having, any sort of check and things like that. If you've been here for some time, you know that we are partnered with Unchecked AI, and I've had my dear friend Myra on a few podcast episodes and some webinars, and we do a lot of things together. Sometimes we call each other at 8 o'clock in the morning, 5 a.m. her time on the Pacific Coast, and we just talk about life. And somehow we always talk about AI and like what's going on in the world. But I will remember her sharing with me this thing about AI being biased because we as humans are biased. And that has stuck with me the entire time. Look, I am a big diver into the world of AI. I try a bunch of different tools. It is definitely helping me manage a lot of things that I used to have to do manually. And it's made me a ton faster. And I still have to be part of the process, and I'm still accountable to the words that are on the page, to the words that are in the script, to the images that get put out, and all of those things. But AI is biased because us as humans are biased. And when bias goes unnoticed, over time, it becomes a much bigger issue. So how does that affect us exactly in evaluation? So I think back to, this program that I evaluated, I and the team did. It was, we sent a survey out to a membership organization. Their members ranged from 22 to 102, all ages, all stages, all areas of the world, generally mostly US based, but, folks living all over the world now. And when, we're asking about the organization and the policies that had just recently put into place, and how they want to interact and engage in all of these things, and just give us your feedback. A lot of qualitative data came back, about 2,400 responses, I believe, and that's a lot of data to go through. So we leveraged AI, and the report comes out, and we shared it with someone, and they're like, "Did you read this?" And I was like, "No, I haven't read it yet." And they were like, I've got concerns. And so I actually finally sat down to read it, and I was like, wait, this feels really jarring. And so the team and I went back, and we started actually reviewing the data ourselves, and we picked up, it was some very strong opinions, and the AI essentially made it seem like the majority of the members that participated in the survey felt this way. But when we went back, only 3 had responded in this tone. And we scanned those, we went through those qualitative surveys, and it was 3 out of 2,400. And those 3 became the loudest. And had we not reviewed that report and had like signals come up, it would have changed policy in that organization. It would have changed direction. It would have changed strategic plans. It would have changed programming. Like there's so many downstream effects. It would fundamentally change the organization, not in the right way. And that is just one instance and one example of how when we do not do our due diligence and we send the report up because you know what? The report came out pretty, AI looked like it did a good job. I can just send it over. It did my job for me. If we had done that, it would have changed the direction of an entire organization. AI is just as biased as we are. And, I think the other piece of AI that folks don't realize is we don't use it enough often, like over and over and over again. I think most people are using it for some small task and then going and doing something else. Like they're not in AI or like a ChatGPT or something like that, or a Claude, like all day, like really working with it, like to do things. So they never gets to the point where it hallucinates. And so it misses those things. And AI misses subtle differences. So there was, an impact study that we were doing months back, and part of, there was a human interviewer, and then we had we had the interviews transcribed. We sanitize them, put them into, our AI tool, and it, without proper training, or just more training. I want to say proper because it was properly trained, just needed more training. It was missing certain key aspects that the human interviewer picked up. And so we think about these little things. AI misses some subtleties that can be so impactful for the organization, but the only way to double check is to have some sort of check and balance. But that check and balance can't be another AI system. It has to be a human. And so what does that mean for us? I think for us, it means we've got to really think about what is our role in the organization now, and what does our work look like? What are the skills that we need in order to do our job with AI? How do we do some of this like check and balance, Because there is definitely, understandably, an argument to be made like, well, if I'm having to double check everything that it's doing, I might as well just do it from the beginning. So what are, how do I do that exactly, right? How do I have that second set of eyes so that I'm still in the loop? And that is something that we need to be working into our processes. It isn't always worked into processes. It's something that we need to work into our workflow, and something that we might need to upskill on. And the fact is, the vast majority of us are untrained in artificial intelligence and how to properly prompt and use it, where these sorts of situations, like the Workday case, can happen much more quickly than we all think. One of my friends said, we were looking at something like, does someone really need a training on how to prompt? And I was like, yeah. Look, I'm in AI all the time. I've learned from, Myra how to properly prompt, and I still put crappy prompts in there because I'm fundamentally lazy at times. And that's with a lot of time that I've spent in the tools and a lot of times I've spent getting myself educated on correct prompting. And, I don't want to sit here and say like, it's also all lazy. It's sometimes we just don't know, right? Like we assume. So it's like this thing I was saying to my friend, I'm like, it's like we assume that ChatGPT is like Google where you just put in a term and it gives you a whole bunch of stuff. You don't realize how important the prompt is and how this is not Google. This is different from Google. So when we don't have people that are spending that sort of time doing those things, and then they're turning around and creating rubrics, right? They're scoring based on those rubrics. And they're conducting observations and they're doing all these things with a tool that they developed using AI that is fundamentally biased. And when you then potentially correlate, let's say that observation with someone else's job, that is a very scary place to be. Now, I recognize that this is not actually my Halloween episode, and I know that this sounds very scary. And I don't want it to sound scary, but it does need to sound serious. See, when we don't properly deploy new solutions, whether it is a new software tool, implement AI, whatever it might be, we don't properly do it, that is where lazy mistakes and things like that happen and just like mess. I think about like when we don't actually sit back and are like, how should I properly set up, like right now we're like going back and like setting up a proper CRM. Like if I don't actually sit down and properly set it up, it's going to create a lot of lazy behaviors and a lot of bad data in the system that becomes really hard to undo after there's like tons and tons and tons of data in there. And then it's hard to make decisions, right? So talk about data-driven organizations and evaluation and how to leverage AI in order to be data-driven. But the fact of the matter is, we can't become data-driven if our data is dirty. And when we are creating biased rubrics or we're allowing the AI to just run with the data without properly training it and having another set of eyes, what you get out is dirty data. And then you're making decision on dirty data. And that is where you change directions on organizations, on programs, and potentially on other humans. So it's a very slippery slope, and one that I think we'll have a lot more to talk about. And I've got some people, I've just met someone that lives in West Palm Beach, so not far from me, that is an expert in this area. So I'm gonna have to ask her to come on the podcast, like in person. I'm pointing here because there's a chair here. And there's a lot more to be said on this topic, and I'm excited to have that conversation because, look, I love AI and it's making evaluation easy and it's helping me fulfill my mission with KP, but it's got to be done right. So, friends, thank you so much for checking out this episode. I'd love to hear how you all are working on AI ethics and governance in your organization. What tools, tricks, tips do you have? What questions do you have? And until next time, see you very, very soon. Bye.